start with Elena Caldwell. Elena is going to be reading her poetry, Oranges. Elena is a senior at Oakland University, double majoring in French and creative writing.
All right, I also usually don't need a microphone because I was a cheerleader growing up, but we'll do this. And I'm going to stand because I'm 5'2", so this just seems right in my heart. So this is my poem, Oranges. My grandmother sends her condolences every year for Christmas with a box of oranges. They are not offensive, not lusty like strawberries, not symbols of knowledge like apples or purgatory like pomegranates, not bananas, not quick to rot like blueberries, nor unreasonably expensive. We haven't spoken in 15 years. My grandmother, who wrote us out in her will before the orange flames could finish diminishing my father down to ashes. My grandmother who had to hose down the dry blood from the driveway where her son was found. My grandmother, whose orange rage still burns my hand when I pick up the box of oranges left at a door from the mailman. My grandmother, whose only role in my life is valued at a box of oranges. My grandmother, who condemns us for my father's death because her son would never do something like that. My grandmother, who still lives in Ohio, whose love is not even performative, who orders the oranges from the Sunshine State and pays extra to include the handwritten note from the farmer who grows oranges we don't ask for. I wanted to get you something you could use. My grandmother, who might think oranges are my favorite fruit because they make me think of her, who doesn't know we let them rot beside my father's ashes in the garage, whose grave I will visit to carefully lay a box of oranges at the headstone, something to fertilize the ashes, and an orange tree will grow right in time for Christmas.
All right, thank you, Elena. Caroline Gagan will be next. She's going to be reading Convenience Store. Caroline is a junior at the College of New Jersey. I'm waiting for the cheer because I know it comes. Like, I'm new to the board and I already know what to expect. Okay. There she majors in English secondary education with a minor in creative writing. Caroline.
Hi, everybody. I'm also standing because I do improv. Convenience store. You walk downtown to get groceries and come back sans tooth, hair, spit, lighter. You're ecstatic. You're saving money. You're reading each label and cackling. Everything is so cheap. A jar of pickles costs a jar of fingernails hardened in the sun. You need bread, so you eat pizza for 2 weeks straight and forget to shower until your face shines slick with oil. Cashier scrapes it all off with a bobby pin, flicks it into the register. Here's your change. Jam is some pimples erupting like firecrackers. Cashier must hate you, but it's okay. You're saving money. She plucks your eyelashes when you buy mascara. No one will notice with the makeup, dear. Wipes your lips as you retch, bags each can of tomato sauce. Thank you, come again. When you splurge on shrimp cocktail, cashier sighs and pulls out a hacksaw, a bullet to bite. Do you write with your right or your left? The pain is quick, and then it's like your pinky was always that short. Each shrimp lies cold on your tongue. You're ecstatic. You pick up your cousin's 10th birthday cake, blue with white fondant icing. Cashier frowns, calls the manager. Just a second. Manager comes, burly with a stern face, puts his hand over your heart, counts 1, 2, 3. Asks if you want a receipt. You shake your head. Stumble outside, cake pressed to your chest. The sun is shining. Icing is melting. You're lighter. Everything is so cheap.
All right, thank you, Caroline. Hayes is next, reading The Anchor or the Balloon. Angelia is a senior at Pepperdine University, majoring in creative writing and minoring in sustainability.
The Anchor or the Balloon. When I was 4 or 5 years old, every time I went to the grocery store, I would beg for one of those red latex balloons, who would turn to beg for the sky. Sometimes my mom would cave, and for a couple dollars, adopt one of the tantalizing helium-filled bubbles, which she would tie to my small wrist so it couldn't escape. The ribbon leash pulled taut, my neck craned back, I'd stare at the captivating orb like a crystal ball, the orb that longed to be liberated from its earthly tether, to float up and up and up. But alas, it could not, for it was stuck on the arm of a child, a living ball and chain who would cruelly lift her wrist to the heavens as a tease, before yanking the poor thing back down again, where it would bob for a second while it recollected itself, but ultimately give in to the futile attempt of ascension every time. To be near it was to be understood. The only thing more satisfying than being the anchor of this creature that aspired to be airborne would be to join it in the sky, two creatures of the same desire. With my new companion, I would attempt flight. I jumped and jumped, but with every landing, the crunch of asphalt would sound in defeat. If only there were enough helium for the both of us, we could silently sail into the clouds, away from this place, away, 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 from the cage that is the concrete ground, from the confines of gravity, pulling me close to this dreary asphalt parking lot.
This is Madeline Youssef. She's going to be reading The Levant. Madeline is a senior at the University of Virgin Isles on St. Croix. Sorry, I'm a Texan. Majoring in English with a concentration in creative writing.
Good evening. As she stated, my name is Madeline Youssef. I was born and raised on the island of St. Croix, the USVI. As you can see, I am Muslim. I was born into a Muslim family, but I don't want to focus on that tonight. When I leave here, I want you all to remember who I am. Not because of where I come from, but because of who I represent and what I represent. Because composed in my entire being is the collection of atoms of every woman that has been born before me and every woman who will be birthed after me. Therefore, you will remember who they are, what they represent, and the pain that is untold because they simply cannot afford the privilege of sharing their experiences, because to do so requires a voice, and they have none. It is still over here. Voices are only emphasized when they come from the mouths of men. But here, right here, it is still. The words of women are singed with ineffable acts, while their lips resemble the arid Arabian desert. Their eyes, what aberrance they have borne witness to. Their wombs, how they lament the warmth of their mothers and wail hardships into the constellations to forge a message for all women to read, a message for all women to take heed. Because the men, they're coming, and they will leave nothing but scraps. But the Levant, it will still scream of women. It will still scorch their backs of history with its brutal, flogging tongue of debauchery, femicide, misogyny, war rape, and yet a denial of abortion, for the women must remember what penetration truly feels like. Trafficking, prostitution, genital mutilation, acid throwing on her genitals, on her womb, on her breasts, that served as sustenance for the man who created such an acid to throw. And in her mouth, so that her voice may finally be removed from the mouth that spoke such purity into the ears that hold the hurt of the world. And so that those men of the Levant may finally silence those women. But they will never stop screaming. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madeline. Renice Desrosens will now read Refractive Memories. Renice graduated from Sacred Heart University in 2021 with a bachelor's in English and a minor in creative writing.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. Refracted memories. It's impossible to know when it began or why it started in the first place. From the time I was little, I'd have these flashes. No, not flashes, they were more like moments. Moments that came and left so quickly, it'd be years until I realized what had happened, what was still happening. I was accustomed to the stagnant fog in my mind. It startled me when the smoke fell around my feet, a mirrored image of myself, the only thing I could see. It didn't matter how young I was the first time the smoke fell. It didn't matter that other kids wouldn't see their own mirrors for years. And it didn't matter how angry I was looking back at it all. All that mattered was the stillness of the moment, when I found my gaze locked on the whiskey of my eyes, not a single thought spared to the large, vertical cracks in my mirror that split my image into 3 separate parts. "Who are you?" a voice echoed. I'm still trying to figure out to whom the voice belonged, but to the child I was, the answer seemed simple. I was 3 different people, and never all at once. The sentiment wasn't literal, though on most days it may as well have been. When I glanced at the split in the mirror to my left, I saw the daisy side I embraced at home. This image of myself was the first one I knew, and funnily enough, it was the first to be distorted. I was used to the butter that lingered on my fingers while I tore into fluffy white pieces of naan. People danced in the warm air of summer as the familiar rhythm of Jumbarabra spilled out the windows of Amma's house. Amma. It was one I never questioned why we called her that. I knew India was home to thousands of dialects and languages, and most Indians, my mom included, grew up speaking at least 2. Though my Hindi and Tamil weren't as refined as my mom's, I retained enough to know the Tamil word amma meant mother, not grandmother. So why didn't we ever call her Dadi instead? The Hindi term was more accurate to her role in my life and my cousins, and since Tamil was hardly spoken by the adults to the kids, the change in language would have been more familiar. Still, I never thought to ask. Maybe that was the problem. Immersed in a realm of langas and Bollywood, it was hard to see the many inconsistencies in my upbringing. It wasn't about Amma's title. It was about how small, harmless moments like these groomed my instincts to normalize the world's distortions, not question them. I'm not saying I'm thankful for the ignorance I had, but if my childhood self could understand the weight of what she did, she would have seen how close to breaking the mirror really was. At the age of 21, it was easier to see the hundreds of thin fissures that littered the glass. When my fingers brushed against them, the voices of my family rang loud. Don't stay in the sun, you don't want to get dark. It doesn't matter what you do, you're not Indian, you're just half. My husband told me he would never want to be black. My eyes locked on a single fissure that flowed and scattered across the other reflections. Despite my best interest, I dragged my finger along the fracture. As my finger moved, the voices shifted from mom's family to my white classmates and their parents. This time, since the fissure was thicker, I could recall the memories that came with it. When I was told being black meant I couldn't be with a white boy, I remember the evening rays of the sun danced outside my classroom before nodding in oblivious agreement. When I was cast as a lead in my school's rendition of Cinderella, I remembered how I chose to focus on my lines instead of the mother that called my black hair sloppy. When I said the phrase, "I wish I were white," I remember how nonchalantly those words left my lips. I remember how I repeated them again and again. I remembered how I didn't stop until freshman year of high school, and I remembered how no one took 2 seconds to stop and give me any reason to think otherwise. My fingers, not even halfway across the center panel, trembled as I removed them from the middle image in the mirror. Tears of salt pooled in my eyes and burned as nature begged me to let them fall. My heart thumped and thumped against the chamber of my chest, while anger and shame pulsated through my veins, frying nerve endings one after the other. I focused my mind on the air in my lungs. Morbid curiosity urged me to look up, to stop observing the fractured glass beneath my finger and to take in the person reflected before me. I refused. Instead, my eyes glared at the bottom of my reflection. I didn't need to look up. I already knew what I'd see. The person in the center would be everything I'd allowed the world to convince me I wanted. She'd be tall, hyper-feminine, and most importantly, she'd be white. I saw droplets hit the floor before I realized I was crying. That girl wasn't me, and ever since I was little, my heart resented the truth that the whiteness I craved never existed in my veins. My soul cried out, powerless against the image that poisoned my thoughts. The aching wells boomed and echoed in the walls of my mind, building and building until I resented myself. Internalized racism clawed at my heart, baiting me to bleach the color of my skin. It wasn't as outrageous as some believed. The option of skin bleaching came and left. It didn't linger long. I was appalled I entertained it. My brown skin, my beautiful, melanated brown skin, was nothing but a hindrance to my younger self. Though my mother was not passive in the blessing of my pigment, I owe my blackness to the strength of my Haitian father. For the first decade of my life, my mother's side, my Desi side, was the primary essence that flowed through my veins. The whiteness I strived for came a close second. My blackness was a distant third. My father had 3 brothers, none of whom were married or had kids. My mother was one of 7, all but one were married and had kids. The imbalance made it difficult to connect with anything besides India, and the lack of black women in my life didn't help. With my father, though I loved him, there was little I could connect to, so he did what he did best. He gave me elements of him and the freedom to find myself. It didn't change the fact that he and I lived different lives. He was born and raised in a country where he embodied beauty. The concepts of racism were foreign entities. He wasn't at fault for how I resented being black. Neither was I. It's not my fault, I whispered to myself, fingers curling into fists by my side. Through the corner of my eye, I could see the furthest reflection, the epitome of my blackness represented in full. The image wasn't clear. The brown skin girl reflected was dull and lifeless and bore the scars of my abuse. I hated what I did to her, what I did to myself. The fishes on her panel were impossible to miss. Shards broken in so many places, I was scared she'd fall apart any second. Slivers of platinum coated many sharp edges, a piss-poor attempt at the art of kintsugi. I thought by emulating the technique used by Japanese artisans, I could follow their philosophy and find beauty in what I perceived to be the imperfections of my blackness. I stopped when I found more cracks than platinum to spare. By habit, my eyes searched for hers. Fire unexpectedly sparked around her irises. It left as soon as it came, and I wanted it back. In the stillness of the moment, I found my gaze locked on the whiskey of my eyes, every thought given to the large, vertical cracks in my mirror that split my image into 3 separate parts. Who are you? A voice echoed. I didn't care to figure out whose voice it belonged to. The child I was, the answer seemed simple, but to the adult I've become, the answer was clear. I am me, and that is enough. My father gave me his elements, and as my fist collided with the glass, I was thankful strength was one of them. My knuckles hammered away at the false images I'd created. They were nothing more than jagged desires. I would not hear the distortion any longer. Pain flared up as shards tore at my skin, but the ambition and my conviction helped me see through it. I break my mirror for the kid doubting the beauty of their skin. I break my mirror for the kid who felt unloved by their cultures. I break my mirror for the kid whose own mirror broke long before they even knew it was there. I pound away at the mirror until it shattered. Then I melt down the pieces and forge a reflection I was proud of.
Hannah Pachkowski, I say it right?
It's Hannah Paskowski.
Pachkowski.
Yes.
We'll be reading notes on repression. Notes on repression. Hannah is a senior at Drew University, majoring in biology and in English with a creative writing emphasis.
I'm going to stand up because I like feeling tall. So this is an excerpt from a longer piece, and it is written in the style of a research paper, which is why the structure is weird. Introduction. My earliest queer memory is playing house during kindergarten recess with Kelly. We would draw a pink and green smudged outline of a family home on the parking lot and pretend to live life as adults. Kelly was always the mom and I was the dad. I would come home through the 2-dimensional front door and get chalk on me from my poorly drawn recliner. Sometimes we would hold hands. We were performers, playing out the family roles we saw at home, on TV, and on the sidewalk. Once she gave me a kiss on the cheek. It was quick and innocent and make-believe, and the teacher's assistant saw this from her post, and suddenly we were not allowed to play house anymore. We were never told why. Research question.
If I admit internalized homophobia to myself, will it go away? Methods 1. How should you respond when people ask, but when did you know? A. Lie and say you've always known. B. Embellish a story about an actress you had a crush on. C. Tell the truth and say you have no idea. Repression. The action or process of suppressing a thought or desire in oneself so that it remains unconscious. The first time I kissed a girl was an accident. It was the summer between middle school and high school. She was a charcoal artist, a year older than I was, and smoked cigarettes she stole from her brother, and she was out of the closet. I was equally fascinated by her and terrified of her. Her hands were always stained, and they were calloused from her guitar. When she smoked in front of us, she showed off by blowing smoke rings. That night, her eyeliner was smudged from laughing too hard. We talked under the stars on a baseball field behind the carnival while we watched our friends get hoodwinked into playing unwinnable games. She made fun of my Catholic school and my uniforms and made me laugh so hard that I smeared my eyeliner too. I pointed out Andromeda, Cassiopeia, and the Big Dipper above us and told her their stories. The carnival lights tinted her gold and pink and blue, and I remember seeing her leaning toward me and my brain going blank. When I pulled away, my thoughts buzzed again, and I had to escape her. That night, I made myself so sick that I didn't go to school the next 2 days, and I blocked her number. I do not remember if I kissed her back. Note, compulsory heterosexuality looks like 1. Needing a date for dances. 2. Forcing yourself to dress girlier. 3. Averting your eyes when you pass a Victoria's Secret. Growing up hating your sexuality means dating. It means dating a lot. It means having a reputation for being easy because you go from boy to boy in hopes you'll feel something this time. It means listening to your friends describe intimacy with their boyfriends over cafeteria food and telling exaggerations about your own conquest to join the conversation. It means only dating boys with eyelashes that curl who wear almost as much makeup as you do, but when someone points out this preference, you date an athlete with a cut jawline to silence them. It means vomiting out of your date's car on prom night when he suggests buying condoms. It means tuning everything out when he does and praying for it to be over. It means not knowing how to prevent yourself from telling a lie when he says that he loves you. It means staying in bad situations because you think it is all that you are worthy of. Methods 2. How should you respond when asked, when and how did you come out? A. Tell them when you were 11, you broke down in your mother's car and told her you were scared that you weren't normal and she had to pull over to calm you down. B. Tell them when you were 13 on vacation, your dad asked about gay marriage and you responded with, I understand why 2 women would want to get married. C. Tell them when you were 16, you accidentally came out to a group of 300 people during an educational event for your production of the Laramie Project. Then there is the half coming out. You don't deny what you are, but you are not proud. You let the cute girl at work with the pixie cut lead you on. You go on what you think is a date that she uses to gush about the new guy she's seeing. She thought she was a lesbian, she says, but thank God this man came along that she actually likes. He's 4 years older than her. He works at the vape stand at the mall. He's not a catch by any means, but now she can finally be happy. She can be normal. You let her buy you ice cream, and when she lends you her jacket, you do not say no. When she kisses you goodnight, you don't protest because it didn't mean anything, right? You even let her text you for months and call you her dream girl without her boyfriend knowing because she's pretty and she makes you feel good, and you will never be in that sort of situation with an available girl. When she and vape stand White Knight break up, she asks you out for real, and you let her stand you up 4 times. The last time, she does not offer another rain check. Methods 3. How should you respond when people ask, so who is the man in your relationship? A. Tell them neither of us, and that's sort of the point. B. Call them out on their obvious attempt to pry into your sex life. C.
Walk away instead of continuing to deal with this shit. Next is the performative acceptance, the ceremonial purchasing of the flannel and the Doc Martens and the haircut. You want to be identified and you want assumptions to be made, and you pretend to be this new person. Your personality changes. You claim this is all you have already been, and you want to fit into the mold that you have been given. You take online quizzes about what kind of queer woman you are, hoping for answers. You hope that if you join a softball team or build a shelf from scratch, maybe a magical puzzle piece will snap into place and you will know who you actually are. Stereotypes alienate you. You visit an old family friend and his husband. You feel safe and you tell them about the girl that you've been seeing. The husband asks if you are the boots or the lipstick in the relationship. When you answer that you are both, you think, he laughs in your face and claims that you have to pick. A gay acquaintance you sit next to in Spanish, whose opinion you've never asked for, tells you that he thinks you're faking it for attention. He states that he believes this because you've dated men before, and you do not bring up the fact that he has dated girls. Discussion. There's a biting loneliness you feel when you experience a uniquely queer problem. You want someone who will not just listen to you, but who will also understand. My sweet mate is that person for me. We can understand each other. We were watching The Bachelor, unironically, at an absurdly late hour over a box of pizza bagels, and we were both so exhausted that we made a game of asking each other hypothetical questions. He asked me if I thought I could ever skydive. I said no. I asked him what kind of soup he would pick if he had to be a soup. He said chicken noodle. Then it was his turn again. He asked, if you could wake up tomorrow and be straight, would you do it? I wanted my first instinct to be to say no. I wanted to say that I was proud of who I am and that I wouldn't choose to be different. I wish that my stomach had not sunk before answering, and truthfully, if I could have magically turned heterosexual at that moment, I would have. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I would not choose to make life harder for myself if given the option. I felt guilty when I said this out loud to him. I expected him to counter me. I expected him to confront me. He just nodded and we went back to our pizza bagels and reality television. At that moment, he understood me. I realized I could have defended myself and said that with these hypothetical magical powers, I would have the ability to eradicate homophobia, which would also make my life easier, but I chose to use this scenario to save myself and illuminate my own queerness instead of the things that made me afraid to be queer. I realized I saw my own sexuality as a nuisance, and I realized that he did too. Note, other things I would change about myself to make my life easier. 1, I would want to have unlimited wealth. 2, I would like to not be an insomniac. And 3, I would want effortlessly clear skin. Conclusion. When I was 18, I fell in love for the first time with a girl who lived down the hall from me. She made me snort laugh, and we went on little adventures to the city together, and I was not afraid to hold her hand in public. I had met her family over winter break and had stayed at her childhood home, and one Saturday I woke up in her bed with her arms around me and silenced my alarm before I could wake her up too. I watched her eyelashes flutter and her breathing go back to its normal pace, and in that moment, laying next to someone and seeing the sunrise through the blinds, I knew that being honest with myself felt easier. I would rather be with her on a Saturday morning than be straight, so I decided to revise my life plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rihanna. Ali Resciano will read It's a Miracle. Ali is a recent graduate at the University of Tennessee at Martin with a degree in English, creative writing emphasis, and a minor in theater.
There we go. Hello. I'll be reading an excerpt from my piece, It's a Miracle. At 13, life was already changing on a social level. My inner circle of friends was thinning as I remained a girl and others turned into women. I was already different. I was already confused, and being put in a wheelchair quadrupled that feeling. I was once the skinny girl who didn't understand the happenings of life no one wanted to talk to, and now I was the girl in the wheelchair everyone wanted to know. I had been out in my chair on a few occasions in stores where there weren't too many people, but I was going back to school for my monthly check-in in a few weeks. The stares of a few strangers were already enough to unnerve me, so I had done what I could to avoid high-traffic terrain, such as Walmart. The long looks, quick glances, and stops of prayers and sorrow made me feel like I had done something wrong. I've never liked to be invisible. I've always been the girl at center stage, but this was a new type of attention I didn't want. I didn't ask to be different. I didn't ask to be looked at like a freak. My feet were starting to burn, blood rushing down my legs faster and faster. The infamous tingling started as my mother found the perfect loaf of sliced white bread. I rubbed at my thighs, knees, and calves as the pain grew stronger. I must have made a face as my mother turned around, placed the plastic-wrapped bread in the cart a ways ahead of me, looked up at me, and said, "Do you hurt?" I nodded my head as the pain surged up into my hips, my legs falling into a burning, unforgiving numb. "You know what the doctor said. You can't be sitting in the chair for too long. You need to get up and walk for a few minutes." I bit my lip. Peppermint chapstick coated my tongue. My heart sank as my worst fear had surfaced. People are going to stare. They're going to think I'm faking. They're going to make those comments. "You're just doing all this for the attention. You should be lucky you can walk. People like you don't need a wheelchair. You're fine. Why are you able to walk? Why do you need a wheelchair? You don't look sick." My withered petals started to fall in slow motion. They floated down and down next to a seamlessly endless stem, wavering in the breeze. My father returned to the cart after retrieving a bag of frozen vegetables further down the aisle. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked after observing my mother's intense stare and my painful attempt to reposition myself. "Your daughter is refusing to get up and walk," my mother said before coming over to me. "It's going to hurt more if you don't get up." I folded my hands in my lap, squeezing my fingers. My shoulders were hunched over. If I could have folded myself into my chair, I would have. I shook my head. We were already causing a scene, as if I weren't a scene already. We were taking up over half of the aisle between myself, the shopping cart, and my mother and father standing on either side of me. "I can't do this," my mother said, turning back towards my father. She shook her head a few times before looking back down at me. I couldn't meet her eyes. "You're going to make yourself feel worse, and I will not continue pushing you. You know what the doctor said." My mother was as frustrated and overwhelmed as I was. Her once healthy daughter was now in a wheelchair, dealing with something we didn't even know I had. She was driving me to and from every appointment, trying to calmly deal with insurance and doctors, and doing research to better educate the whole family. She was, and always will be, my superhero and biggest advocate. But sometimes harsh love is what needs to be heard. I could see my skin starting to turn red at my knees and knew it was happening to my feet too. The pain was getting too much to handle. The only way to calm the millions of raging, biting ants running up and down my legs was to get up and take a few steps. My petals slipped as a cold gust of wind rattled their edges, causing their free fall to hiccup for a brief moment. I took a deep breath and met my mother with watery eyes. She gave me an encouraging nod. I gazed past her at the numerous people in the aisle, many of whom were turned towards us. They stared with curiosity and confusion. I averted my gaze to my father. He gave me his famous goofy smile and a thumbs up, a devious sparkle in his eyes. I let out a shaky breath. I had to stand in front of everyone. "You're just doing all this for the attention. You should be lucky you can walk. People like you don't need a wheelchair. You're fine. Why are you able to walk? Why do you need a wheelchair? You don't look sick." I set my burning feet on the ground and bit my lip as I placed my sweating palms on the arms of my chair. I held onto the arms tightly as I braced myself and stood. My stomach swirled as I watched the curious shopper's eyes widen and jaws drop out of the corner of my eye. My pedals were seconds away from hitting the earth. I had every urge to sit back down immediately and not take the much-needed steps. "It's a miracle!" my father shouted at the top of his lungs, with his arms lifted in the air. He stared down at me with a huge grin, hands still raised above his head. The strangers looked even more shocked, a woman's hands placed over her heart. My mother was laughing hysterically, bracing herself on the side of the cart. I stepped away from my chair with the biggest grin and placed my hands on my hips. I had just performed a miracle, according to the watchful strangers. A warm gust of wind blew my petals back up to the top of the stem, and, like magic, they reattached themselves.
their wrinkled skin smoothed out into a silky and shiny satin. I no longer felt like crying. I could no longer feel the burning pain in my legs that was still present. I caught my mother's laugh, a joy I had once thought was lost returning. It was the first time I had genuinely laughed in months. My father flopped his arms back down but didn't let his bright smile falter. See, that wasn't so bad. Let them all think they just witnessed a miracle. He had turned a scary scene into something humorous with our dry family humor, causing a positive development for us all. The position we had all been thrown in affected us in different ways, but the topic didn't have to stay grim. The new changes in lifestyle were serious and difficult for the whole family, but life continued despite the struggle. There was no point wallowing in the depths of defeat or fear of what others would think. We could still laugh and make light of the situation that would now be our new normal. Life continues, and I can't let the thoughts or stares of others stop me.
Thank you, Allie. Olivia Shepp is going to read a collection of unsent thank you letters. Olivia is a senior at the University of Arkansas studying English creative writing with a minor in Spanish.
Hello, everyone. So, I will be reading excerpts from my essay, A Collection of Thank You Letters. So there's a bit of a tonal shift after the first letter. You guys can roll with it. Thank you for being here, by the way. Dear Mom, being homeschooled was my point of pride as a child, and I never cared about those people who would side-eye us in the grocery store. I was thankful for you and confident in your abilities with a childlike faith that was unshakable. Nowadays, I can't comprehend why you did that. 4 kids. You homeschooled 4 kids, sacrificing 20 years of your life to breaking up childish skirmishes and making peanut butter sandwiches. For years, the only reason we left the house was to go to church. The fact that we can all read seems like a miracle. The fact that you're still sane definitely is one. You fondly recall the intangible fulfillment educating us gave you, and I at least know I reaped benefits. Because of you, I spent my childhood buried in books, simultaneously losing and finding myself in their words. And sure, things weren't perfect, but nothing is, right? Maybe being so sheltered made me closed-minded. Maybe I didn't know how to do long division until after high school. And maybe my entire sex education came exclusively from secretly reading fan fiction. But everyone has gaps in their education, right? I'll always be grateful for my roots and the path you set me on. With so much love, your daughter. Dear Apostolic Leader, I don't know how to write this letter. I put it off for so long. I intended to write and thank you for forgiving my parents of the debt they owed to you. But I don't want to. My parents were only in debt to you because you talked everyone into funding your unrealistic private Christian school that crumbled to pieces within 2 years. You forgave my parents of debt you coerced them into taking on from you. And besides, you knew that the director of that school was being verbally abusive to all the children, including my sisters. In hindsight, I guess she learned from the best. I see that her classroom was a microcosm of your congregation. I wish I could thank you for something. The idol I made you into loomed largest throughout my life. I loved our congregation. I worshipped in our services. I grew up alongside your daughter for 16 years. I was forged in the fire of your ministry, and I can only be thankful for these burns because they have made me who I am. Surely you realize how much influence you had over me. I'm acutely aware of the heavy hand you played in shaping my life, with your impossible standards and endless judgment. I'll never fully forget the education I received in your pews. You taught me love in the only way you knew, but it was the toxic love that scarred. I've had professors show more compassion than you did, my own spiritual father. But all that said, your rage-fueled, fiery Sunday services railing against the sinners of the world remain strangely nostalgic. They were bad times, but simple times, where the world seemed direct and clear. Even years later, I still wonder who I am without you all. I lost a part of myself when I left, but you did always preach about dying unto oneself. I wouldn't be who I am today without you, but I won't let you determine who I become next. Thank you for forgiving the debt you got us into. Thank you for all the bittersweet memories. I still love you all. With an aching heart, your former follower. Dear English faculty at my local university, due to the recent vacancy of my previous role model, thank you all for being involuntarily selected to become my newest heroes. Reaching college and meeting others who had the same passion for English as me was revelatory. I've always considered myself a writer, but college unlocked a gold mine of my kind of people, and it assuaged the bitter ache of losing an entire church I'd once thought of as family, but you guys don't know anything about that. Speaking of other things you don't know, I'd like to thank you all for rescuing me during the hardest time of my life. Some of it was kind of your fault. Your classes destroyed everything I'd ever believed about the world. I grew up homeschooled, and so I have some gaps in my education. I was never taught history with a Eurocentric filter. I was never taught real science. You all showed me so much possibility beyond my previously narrow scope. Unfortunately, I struggled to discern what I could trust from my past, and so, in full swing extremism, I threw out everything I had believed. While decluttering my backwards notions, I actually threw out some important things, including my will to live. Pesky how that happens, but it paid off in the long run. The years I have spent in your English classes systematically reconstructed me in spans of 16-week semesters. I've been reborn into a zealot who would follow you all to the ends of the earth. I thrived in your classes and have taken pursuit after just a fraction of your wisdom. My baptism into higher education has made me into your acolyte. I am aware enough to know I have traded one idol for another, but I haven't lived much of my life without someone else telling me how to think. Self-determination is still a novel concept to me. While I figure it all out, just know I have staked my place at your side, and you're gonna have a hard time getting rid of me now. With fervent adoration, your biggest fan. There's one more, bear with me. Dear Olivia, that's me. You always turn to others before giving yourself any credit. It's your greatest virtue and your deepest vice. You see your life's trajectory arcing forward like an arrow that someone else fired, forgetting that you hold the bow. Too often you view yourself in the mirror of other people's eyes. It requires careful addition and subtraction to decipher how much of us is us and how much is the influence and guidance of others. But I can appreciate myself more when I see where all of my fragmented pieces come from, putting me together like a living composite character. That said, you can give yourself a little credit. So thank you, Olivia. Thank you for dog-eared pages, for hastily prepared book reports, and for scribbles in the corners of notebooks. Thank you for believing in yourself enough to learn long division. Thank you for cheating on your history tests, because later you'll wish you'd done worse. Thank you for being angry enough to escape from a toxic situation, and thank you for carrying on in spite of it all. You're still young, you have a lot left to learn, and I hope someday you'll get to the point where you can, in turn, raise up others on the shoulders of the giants you stand upon yourself. With love, yourself. Thank you all.
We had a ninth reader. You had to cancel at the last minute, but the nice thing about that, the only nice thing about that, we always want to hear more, is that it allows for a few more minutes for questions and answers in the session. So we're going to start that. So if you have any questions, I'll let you start speaking to the authors.
I'd like to begin. I don't have a question.
celebration of, well, I'm approaching this as a writer and a creative endeavor, and also being the person with the lived experience.
Thanks, Dana. Amy, you want to start, and we'll just go all the way down the table? We'll give one at this end and one at this end, and that we can use our time a little more effectively.
I share all of my writing with my parents because I'm an only child and I don't know any better. But this piece was really special to me because it was the first time I had people other than my parents read it. I actually had most of it proofread by my ex-girlfriend. Shout out to my ex-girlfriend. But it was nice to actually get feedback from people other than my mother. And every time I include someone close to me in a piece, I make sure to tell them so that they don't accidentally find out. But they were all very supportive and they all understood how personal essays help me work through stuff. Yeah, I gotta say, I don't necessarily share everything with my parents. This one I did, this one is fine. Maybe not what I read earlier, but this one is more personal, not so much about my family, but I did get feedback from some of my closest friends who also happen to be artists or writers, artists of some kind. But I think getting feedback and sharing these vulnerable parts with people who are close to you are very important in, developing not only my inner voice but like my authenticity, because a lot of my personality does come from these relationships that I form with the people in my life.
Okay, so for me, I don't normally write about my family. If anything, I've learned to start using poetry as my outlet as I'm growing and aging and figuring out more facets of my identity that I didn't even know were there. So my parents are here, and this is the first time they have heard this. But I think I'm somebody who, as a writer, has put up a very strong barrier of I'm going to write my truth in the fullest, honest capacity I can think of that does right by my story, not to hurt people, not to expose or shade anybody, but just to have it be as authentic as possible, and understanding that, that might step on a few toes. Yeah, I might have some family members call me up in the future and be like, hey, no, what was that about? But still being firm and this is nothing against you, this has to do with my journey, this is my walk, and there's no other way I can hide behind it or turn it around. So just understanding those two facets.
The opposite of that. I'm actually a nonfiction major by trade, and my poem actually started as I tried writing as a short story, and I couldn't get it, and I let it sit for a really long time. And then I took a poetry workshop, and I needed to write a prose poem, so I'm sure everybody here has ideas they just keep, and I was just like, okay, what can I do that does not have to be an original idea in this current moment? And I came onto this page and about this oranges, and I clearly did not ask my grandmother. As I said, so this poem is true, really. I'm a nonfiction, like I said, by trade, and so I did not ask her. We are unfortunately not close. My dad committed suicide when I was 6. And so I don't really ask my family because there is a lot of tumultuous relationships as a result. My family really does not know the scope of my writing, and I'm okay with that, and I think that's best for what my family is going forward. But similar to you, I do not apologize, and I really take the scope of the shared, engaging, creative space liberally. And even though I don't know most of you, and this is quite a large room, I respect that all of you probably aren't going to go up to my family and say, "Look what your daughter wrote." And so, my family, I'm the only bookie in my family, and honestly, I kind of live by life. If I don't tell them that I got published, they probably won't find out, and I am so okay with that, and I think that is the best way to go situation. Oh, okay, sorry.
So my poem wasn't really about family, it was more so a social concern, a humanitarian, a feminist concern. But in terms of my family, you know, a lot of people would probably have quite a plethora of stereotypes built towards Muslims, but my family is actually rather supportive of everything I do, even if they don't understand it. And I think that that is a very soft trait to have, and vulnerable is strength. And the one thing that they have never done was minimize my pain, and I think that that's so important in society. You have to be weary of everyone's pain level. You know, everyone has a different tolerance. You could have a rich kid coming from who God knows where, and he's got everything in his pocket, but he has no skill. And that could form a rather deep depression for him. We would not understand because maybe we grew up in a, you know, in a realm that we had to work hard for things, and we have other issues to tend to. But you still do not look towards them and say, it doesn't matter. Because I could sit here and say, well, my issue compared to her issue is not physical, but at the end of the day, both of our issues are extremely significant because we are all separate worlds that coexist in an entire world, and we are all representative of an issue that is occurring. So that's what I have to say.
I mean, I actually don't even remember if I shared this poem with my family, but like they've heard my poetry. I get a lot of my surrealist attitude from my dad. Even him, like, we'll be walking, like I'll see him after a poetry reading, and he'll be like, "Yeah, I didn't get that. I don't." I think I have written about my family. I have written kind of more personal works, usually for a school assignment. It's always like, write about your family. But I think that as a writer, I think that a lot of times I like to try and put distance kind of between myself and the personal work. A memoirist, I am not.
Well, my essay is a collection of unsent thank you letters for a reason. I have not shared this with most of the people who I wrote about, and because it deals so heavily with my subjective experience, it underwent many revisions. I really struggled to reconcile the emotional reality of what I went through with trying to find some sort of ethical representation of other people. And in the end, obviously I found some kind of inner peace because I was willing to read this to you all tonight. But there are some people I have shared it with. My mom has read the letter that I wrote to her, and it actually spurred a very positive conversation between us about my education growing up. So there's pros and cons, you know, there's boundaries, but most of them are unsent for a reason.
My family is extremely supportive. They are all about me trying to find myself and find my path in life, even if that means making them a little bit uncomfortable. They always work towards wanting to learn more and being really supportive and being my biggest advocates. But with that being said, I am the black sheep of my family. My family is a family of basketball players, and I'm the creative writer, and so it's like, I'll be like, hey, I'm working on a new book, and they'll be like, cool, sounds good. So I love writing about my family. I cherish my childhood and everything they've done for me. So this piece, actually, I will tell them when I'm writing something about them, or I'll call up my mom and be like, hey, how do you remember this? Like, what do you remember saying in this scene? But I usually won't show them them the actual finished copy. This was a special situation. I actually gifted it to them as Christmas. I wrote a whole collection of memoirs to give them. So this was the first piece I really fully shared with them. It does bring up the question of as they talked down there about how separating your personal life from being a writer and being hey, this is how I remember the scene, and that doesn't mean anything against you, is how I remember it, and there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with how you remember the scene. We all remember things differently. We're all the main characters of our own stories. So it's definitely a topic of what makes a memoir reliable, what makes a memoir, how that all works personally, and it's something I'm still dealing with even a year after writing this. It still brings up conversations, but I enjoy writing about my family, and thankfully they are extremely supportive even when they don't really understand what I'm doing, but yeah.
Any other questions?
I asked Floyd and everyone, so sorry not having any sessions again. But can you talk a little about your creative process from conception to a vision to the kind of product you have now? Please go down.
So my creative process is weird for every project I work.
I think thinking about this piece in particular, because technically this question has two answers for me. Nonfiction is not my avenue. Complete contrast. Nonfiction is not my avenue. My avenue is fiction, specifically fantasy. I love that world, and that is where my heart lies. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And this was born from a creative writing class that I took my final semester of senior year, and my professor, because this is, like I said, not my medium, it's hard for me to connect with nonfiction. It was very, very difficult for me to find my voice in that. I found my voice everywhere else, but nonfiction, it was just such a disconnect. And my professor, she had us have these short little essays that we would do as our homework assignments per week, and they're just 300 words on a very broad theme that we could do whatever we want on. And though I loved what I had written every single week, I was crying and freaking out at 3 a.m. trying to finish it the day it was due. So it was very hectic, and then the final assignment was a 1,500 word piece on whatever we wanted. And after suffering for 6 weeks, doing all of these small pieces, I sat down with myself, figured out what I had learned, and I was like, what am I gonna write about? And the easiest thing for me to connect with when I couldn't connect with anything else was myself and my family and my heritage. And I used that fuel to just go. Wrote everything out in one draft. And the first time I hadn't freaked out, and that was because I was building the voice that I wanted to use for the future. Not focusing on it being a writing voice, focusing on it being my voice, and just trying to talk to myself through the page in a way that I would normally have that conversation with my younger self or my friends, just trying to de-stressify a situation that felt so alien to me. So when it comes to that was the process for this. And then in general, because like I said, fiction and fantasy is where I live, it's mostly seeing the world around me, but specifically music and so many playlists that I have created over the years, and just finding inspiration there in dialogue, in Harry Potter, and all these other different things that keep me in the world that I want to be in. So that's what I've used.
We've got 8 talented artists up here, but they are looking out at a room of very gifted writers. Also, I hope on April 11th to start seeing submissions from all of you for the Rectangle Editors. All right, thank you.